next pastor, Adam Lambrecht, has served as a campus pastor at Luther High School in Onalaska, Wisconsin since 2023. Prior to this, he has served as a missionary in Laramie, Wyoming, following his graduation from the seminary in 2019. Before he attended the seminary, he served as a youth ministry volunteer for Wells Kingdom Workers in Farmington, New Mexico. He also served as a Wells staff minister in 3 congregations in Colorado, Battlement Mesa, Colorado Springs, and Pueblo West. Adam and his wife Sarah have been blessed with 4 children. Eagerly await your presentation here, Adam. God's blessings on that. And the mic off here.
All right, just let me get my other wires hooked up to me. That's the only way I function, actually, is if I have wires hooked up to me. All right, we're still in the morning, right? Good morning? Okay, good morning. Thank you all for being here. In case I forget, I just should mention it now. There are some handouts here. It's not that you need to have a handout. Maybe it's a reflection of who I am sometimes when I'm in a presentation. I might be a doodler. I sometimes remember better when I'm doodling. There's good research that says a lot of people remember things better when they write. So feel free to use the handout if you would like. There's no obligation to do that, though. Okay, the title of my presentation is Upright Sheaves. And you might first ask yourself, why in the world is the title of the presentation Upright Sheaves? Where does that come from? Well, I will explain that along the way. But I thought maybe first, before we talk about upright sheaves, I should mention a few things about myself. So here is a picture of my family. Those are my 4 children, kind of scattered on the top left all the way down. One of my children is here, not to embarrass him, but that's what I like to do anyway, is embarrass him. This is Leo. He's my son. He's a freshman in high school this year. It's a big year. And full disclosure, Leo is one of the people I respect most in this world because he has had to deal with a lot of difficulties in his life, faces the reality of death in a very real way often in his life. So maybe I'll mention a little bit about that, unless Leo just kind of gets really red and says, no, don't. Then I won't. 4 children. Our oldest, Simeon, he's in the upper left corner. He is a fireman in Wyoming. He got hooked up in that career when I served as a pastor out there, so he's still out there, though, thinking of moving back to the area. My daughter, Ada, is a senior in high school this year. My son, Ruben, is in 5th grade, and as I mentioned, Leo is a freshman in high school this year. I met my wife when I was a staff minister. So I started in ministry as a staff minister down in Farmington, New Mexico. We served on the Navajo Nation together. And although I didn't realize until a little while later that she was actually the roommate of my sister in college. I didn't realize that because I was afraid of girls at the time, and maybe still am in some ways. But God has blessed me with a wonderful wife, a wonderful partner, not only in life but in ministry as well. It was mentioned a little bit about serving in different places. I put some pictures here because these are the things that I often remember most. I've been blessed to be able to serve in some beautiful places. This is Farmington, New Mexico. This is Battlement Mesa, Colorado, right behind my house. I don't have a projector or a clicker to show you, but that was basically the backdrop of my house in Battlement Mesa, Colorado. Just a beautiful place to be. Colorado Springs, Pikes Peak in the background. Pueblo West, Colorado. There's a theme here. Mountains, frequency. Yep. And then Laramie, Wyoming. Along the way, throughout this presentation, I'll maybe share some stories with each one of those places. Each one of those places taught me an awful lot about ministry. Probably taught me an awful lot about being a pastor, being a father, being a husband, and in general, just being a godly man. That is really kind of at the heart of what this presentation will be about. Why? Why this presentation? Why me? These are all the usual disclaimers that everyone does before a presentation. oh, I really don't know anything about this. I don't know why they picked me. I'm going to do those anyway, even though you hear them all the time. I'm not sure why I was asked. I got an email, and they said, would you like to present about reaching out to teenagers or maybe supporting and encouraging teenagers? I said, okay, sure. I don't think I have any particular expertise in this area. I haven't done research on this at all, with the exception of one of my students who's here in the front row. He can verify that I have talked to our classes about this topic. I don't have any specific expertise. But here's the big but in this. The big but is that I was a teenager once too. And that's where I'll start. It's a picture, I don't know how well you can see it. It's an old picture of my siblings and me around my dad on his birthday. My dad is probably the one who taught me more about ministry than anything else. He was a mail carrier for 35 years. He went to school for aviation mid-management. That was his college degree. I love the fact that back in his day, they set their sights pretty middle of the road. I'm going to go for a degree in mid-management. I don't want anything higher than that. He wanted to work at a small airport, is really what he wanted to do. And he also had a very promising baseball career in front of him. He was a great baseball player, was offered a minor league contract with the Chicago Cubs, and turned it down because his wife was pregnant with their first child, and he wanted to be home with his family. And that's also why he chose the career of postman. It gave him a good job, enough to support his family, good benefits. My dad died about 7 years ago, so I miss him every day. I wish I could call him up on the phone, but the moment that I think of most when I think about ministry is probably in my dad's final year of his life. I just watched a steady decline. This incredible athlete who had forearms like Popeye, could throw incredible curveball. I watched him physically decline because of cancer. And I was at the seminary at the time. I was a vicar about to start my vicar year at Mount Lebanon in downtown Milwaukee Urban Ministry. And he wanted to come to my installation as a vicar, but he just couldn't physically. He couldn't handle it. And I said, Dad, it's no big deal. He felt terrible that he couldn't be there. I said, it's fine, Dad, really. It's not a big deal at all. And he said, no, it is. It is. I know what's happening to me, he said. I know where I'm going. I know that my life is about to end. And he said, I can't tell you how much this means to me to have pastors, to have people who point me to God's promises in my final moments. Here this postman understood ministry. That's sort of the perspective that I've tried to take with teenagers. Sadly, it's taken me until adulthood to learn that lesson, because I think I caused no shortage of grief to my father while I was a teenager myself. On my dad's birthday, we decided to bake him a cake, and he was such an easygoing guy. He loved the cake, even though we made it with coconut, and he hated coconut. He couldn't stand. I don't know why we made it with coconut, now that I think about it, but he put up with an awful lot from us. Not just the birthday cake made of coconut, but a lot of wandering from his middle son, his middle child. There is a picture of me here as actual proof that I have hair. I had hair at one time, Elijah. I did. It's not fake. It's not. It's not AI. I was blessed to be raised in a Lutheran home. I was raised in a Lutheran congregation. I went to a Lutheran grade school. I went to a Lutheran high school. I had pastors that knew me and appreciated me. I had pastors that would talk to me and reach out to me. So I had a wonderful support system. At the same time, for whatever reason, I started to wander away from that. My years in high school were not good. My years in college were even worse. Wandering along some dangerous paths, getting into alcohol and drugs in ways that was just not good. I suppose I should maybe tell you a little bit about where I went to college. I didn't go to MLC. I'm not sure, I didn't follow the typical path to pastoral ministry. I went to Iowa State University, bounced around through a couple different majors there. At a big university, I was exposed to some big ideas, started to embrace myself to some different ideas, and wandered away from the faith. I don't know that it would be a stretch to say that I maybe even lost my faith during that time in college. And what happened is that God put some incredible people in my life who were able to call me back from that precipice. They reached out. They continued to have patience. They continued to pray for me. So you'll see that this is going to inform my presentation about teen ministry, I think. This is when I finally graduated from Iowa State University. I put the picture on there because one of the people who actually had the biggest influence in bringing me back from the edge of dangerous activities in my life was my grandfather, who is to the, well, you're right in that picture. He died in 2005, but he was the one who called me up and called me out. And I suppose this is my way of saying that as you consider your ministry to the teenagers that God places in your life, it doesn't matter what age you are. I learn an awful lot about teenagers from my son. I learn an awful lot about teenagers from grandparents and parents as well. I think there's a place for all of us to improve our ministry to teens. And then this is my first year in New Mexico. So I went down to serve. After I graduated from Iowa State University, I thought, I'd love to get a job in broadcasting or television. It wasn't a great time for the economy. That was in 2001 when I graduated, and so I bounced around for a while. I was a janitor at my old high school for a while. Went back and lived with my parents for a while. Wasn't particularly the best time of my life. And then I volunteered with an organization called Wells Kingdom Workers because I was tired of living with my parents and I had to get out of the house. I was just done. I said, I'll do anything. They said, we can't pay you. I said, great, that sounds awesome. I can't wait to get out of the house. I moved down to Farmington, New Mexico. They already had one volunteer through Wells Kingdom Workers. That was my wife, or the woman who would become my wife. She gave up part of her salary to get another worker down there because there were so many mission opportunities. And she doesn't hold that over my head at all, which is great. I'm so thankful for that. So we met in New Mexico. We're blessed with our first child, our first two children there. This is the baptism of our first child, Simeon. My mom and dad came down for that, as well as my younger sister. More proof that I had hair. So I went through some things as a teenager and as a college student and then even as a young husband and as a young father. So I do have some experience with being a teenager. And this is probably the most dramatic experience that I've had because as a father, then I started to raise my kids and then I had a teenager. And this happened to me while I was in Laramie, Wyoming. It was about 1:30 in the morning where my wife and I woke up to the phone ringing, the call that you never want to hear. It was my son. My wife answered, but I could hear, and he was panicked. He did not know who he was. He did not know where he was. His car had rolled over 5 times on a deserted road outside of Laramie. I don't know how, but his phone still happened to stay in his pocket that entire time. It wasn't crashed, wasn't cracked and broken at all. And he just happened to see that there was someone named Mom in his contacts. And he thought, well, that's probably going to be a safe person. He didn't know who he was. So at 1:30 we get this call. We hop in the car immediately because we had location enabled on his phone. We were able to find him before the ambulance and the fire trucks even got there. We were the ones that actually called them. And I saw 4 kids kind of scattered around, and I don't think I've ever seen so much blood in my life. It was unreal. I thought there is no way that someone did not die here. No one died. My son and his friends weren't drinking. They weren't doing drugs. They had played Mario Kart earlier in the night, and as they were all going home, they said, "Hey, you know what? Isn't that cool how you can drift in Mario Kart? We should see if we can get our car to drift." The guy who was sitting next to my son who was driving, he said, "Well, let's try it." And he grabbed the steering wheel and yanked down on it, which caused the car to roll 5 times. My son doesn't remember a whole lot from that night. What he does remember is what comes up in the nightmares that he still has. It is looking up and seeing the gravel road above his head. There was a sunroof in the car that shattered. And so every time it rolled, he looked up and he saw the gravel above his head. I forget how many stitches, how many staples he had. The call you never want to get and the scene you never want to see. But that wasn't even the worst of it. What happened here is, I don't know, I'm not a doctor, but this event changed my son. I don't know how else to describe it. I've since looked into a little bit of the physical and psychological research that goes into this, but traumatic brain injury or even just concussions can actually change your personality for anywhere from 12 months to 24 months, it seems like. My son became a different person. I didn't recognize him anymore. A couple months after this, my son had a relationship with a girl, and he got her pregnant. And he said, "You know what? I'm done with you, family. I don't love you anymore. I don't think you really love me. I'm going to move in with my girlfriend. I just don't want to be a part of this family." So, I didn't handle that so well as a dad. So, part of this presentation is also you understanding that the lessons that I'm going to share with you are ones that I learned painfully. I dug my heels in quite a bit, said a few things that I really regret, forced my son into some decisions that I never should have forced him into, and along the way probably forgot the power of God's Word working in the hearts of His people. Okay, that's kind of a downer. I'm sorry that I started with that, but you need to know that there is some background here to this presentation. Okay. Sorry. So why this presentation? Why this thing called upright sheaves? Well, shortly after I was asked to present, and I was wondering what the heck I'm going to present about, our high school went through the process of adopting a cell phone policy. And it was a good policy, I'm convinced. It was good, even though there's maybe some details we still have to iron out about that. I think it was a good policy, and as I'm explaining it to the kids in our classes, I teach senior religion at Luther High School. I also teach a few sophomore religion classes. But as we're talking about it, one of the students actually raises her hand and she says, "Wait a minute. Can you explain to me why we're expected to stand up and embrace this change?" And this is especially hard for seniors who have had 3 years of cell phone liberality, right? They could use their phones whenever they wanted. Can you explain to me why we're expected to stand up, embrace this change, and deal with it if no one is expected to stand up and change with us? I actually thought that was a really insightful comment. And that's actually what directed me on the path of this presentation. So this is why we call it upright sheaves. Okay? It took me to the story of Joseph, one of the few teenagers that we get a fair amount of information about in the Bible. There aren't a lot of them. You get some in the Old Testament. You get to learn about King David probably when he was 13 years old or so. There's some kings, an 8-year-old king in the Old Testament. And you certainly get to see that one glimpse of Jesus' teenage years, sort of, in the New Testament, but we don't get a lot of information about teenagers. So if I was going to talk about ministry to teenagers and what that looks like, then maybe the story of Joseph is a good one. A 17-year-old kid who gets some dreams from God and then experiences the betrayal of his own family and a dramatic upheaval in his life, and yet you see God directing it all. I also have to thank Professor Nass from MLC for this, because when I decided to go back to school to be a pastor, I realized there's some gaps in my story that I didn't share with you, and my apologies. I did decide to go back to school to be a pastor. I went to MLC for 2 years to catch up on my languages and had Professor Nass, who reads through the story of Joseph with you as you learn Hebrew. And he had so much enthusiasm for it, so much excitement for it, that it sticks with me to this day. So he's partly to blame. So if you walk away from this presentation and say, man, I don't know, there wasn't very much good information, I talk to Professor Nass and blame him then. And then I thought about the story of Joseph, these dreams he gets where he has this dream of his sheaf standing upright while all of these other sheaves bow down to it. Now, full disclosure, the point of that story is not to emphasize how Joseph propped himself up. And obviously, this is God directing all things, right? And God was using an incredible dream to actually prompt the plan that he had for Joseph and for his people. You have to learn to connect the story of Joseph with the story of Jesus. But I started thinking about sheaves. How many of you have any experience with farming or maybe know what sheaves are? Yeah, what's the purpose of sheaves?
It was to stand the bundles of wheat or grain so that they would dry out, and that when they would take them and put them through the thrash machine, or if they did it manually, that you'd separate the seeds from the chaff.
Yeah, and I just loved that. I had to look that up because I didn't know that personally. I had to learn that. But I love the idea of standing these bundles of grain up so that they can be useful and productive.
And usually they were bundled together for support.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a single. You would bundle 8 to 10, depending upon the size of the sheaf.
Yeah. So there's support and strength in sort of a community. Yep. And I thought, boy, this is a great way to think about ministry to teens. Another thing that I learned about sheaves is that bundling them up this way actually discourages rot and vermin from getting into the wheat or whatever grain it might be. And I thought, boy, isn't that also what we're trying to do with teens? We're trying to bundle them together. We're trying to stand them upright so they know the support they have. They know the gift of salvation they have in Christ. And then we're also trying to protect them through this process. So the story of Joseph with the sheaves actually turned out to be kind of a convenient way to think about teen ministry. And I think there's common ground here for both teenagers and adults. The story of Joseph has a lot of relevance for us as parents or as grandparents when we think about our teens. And the story of Joseph has a lot of relevance for teenagers as well, when you think about what Joseph goes through as a teenager himself. Here's my claim. I'm going to argue that this is what we want from teens. Part of this comes from my own feelings, my own conclusions as a father and as a husband, and talking with my own parents as well. I think I've had enough conversations with parents to say that these are probably generally things we would all agree on. This is what we want in our teens. We want them to understand their identity more than anything. And you have a world, I just listened to the professor, Dr. Pastor Michael Berg talk about this. You have a world that's telling them to look to themselves for identity, which is philosophically and rationally impossible when you think about it. So we want our teens to know that their identity comes from something outside of them and that they have to understand themselves based on something that comes from outside of them. And you know what that is. That is Christ. That's where their identity comes from. We want them to know that they are redeemed children of God, first and foremost. But then we also want teens who, I think, appreciate mystery. And that is to say that they appreciate the sometimes winding path that life takes. This was a big one for me, to know that God doesn't always just work in straight lines, that He sometimes uses unusual circumstances. God uses barren women and prostitutes in the line of a Savior, the one who would come to redeem all people from the sins of prostitution and violence. We want teens to understand that and appreciate it. At the same time, we want them to trust God's direction through all of this. That God isn't abandoning them when they go through mysterious and unusual things, but that He's actually drawing them closer and still working for their eternal good. We want them to relish support systems. We want them to be built up and strengthened with a community. They are not on their own, and they need to know that. And we get to be the ones that help them and build them up. We want them to stand up and stand out. We want them to be like Joseph as he stands up for his faith when Potiphar's wife has this tempting offer. And he says, how can I do that and sin against my God? We want them to stand out in this world when you think of Joseph putting this incredible plan into place that saves Egypt's economy during a devastating drought. We want our teens to know the gifts God has given them and to use them and to rejoice in them. And maybe, more than anything, it connects to their identity. We want them to know the forgiveness they have in Christ, and we want them to be able to give and receive that forgiveness from others as well. I suppose I should pause here and just ask if those are fair assumptions about what we want in our teens. So, how do we get there? I think the story of Joseph really helps a lot. Genesis 37, 6 and 7. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. Sorry, I said 6 and 7. I just saw all the teens smirk at each other. This is all the time, by the way. All the time. He said to them, I shouldn't even have acknowledged it. He said to them, listen to this dream I had. We were binding sheaves of grain out in the field when suddenly my sheaf rose and stood upright while your sheaves gathered around mine and bowed down to it. There are so many details behind this story that I would love to know. The Bible doesn't reveal a lot of them. Was Joseph kind of needling his brothers? I don't know. How would you handle it if God gave you this dream? This is a difficult story, but I think one of the questions that pops up with this is, what is my place in this world? I bet you Joseph wrestled with that. You get a dream about upright sheaves, or the sun, moon, and stars, and you probably start thinking, what does this mean for me? Where am I going? What's the purpose? What's the plan in my life? Here's the common ground. We're trying to teach teens that they have a place and a point and a purpose in this life, and teens are wrestling with that very same question. What is it? Genesis 37, 10 and 11. What is this dream you had? This is Jacob. Will your mother and I and your brothers actually come and bow down to the ground before you? His brothers were jealous of him, but his father kept the matter in mind. What is going to happen next? If there's one thing I've learned in 2.5 years, close to 3 years of serving teens full-time as a campus pastor, it's that this is a question that is often on their minds. What's next? And probably for good reason. They're at a time of life where they're starting to think about what's coming after high school. What's next? This might be the last time that they have in a Lutheran, a Christian context. So what comes next? When his master heard the story, his wife told him, saying, this is how your slave treated me. He burned with anger. This is Potiphar. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. Genesis 39. How do you deal with betrayal in your life? I think as adults, we have to learn to admit to our kids that we have been and felt betrayed. And how you deal with it, how you demonstrate resilience in your life, is important. Teens understand that. They're wrestling with that. And so the story of Joseph provides us some common ground to talk about that topic. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison warden in the span of about 2 years, 3 years maybe at the most? Joseph goes from being the favored son in his father's household, the kid who actually doesn't have to go out in the fields and work with the flocks, right? He doesn't have to. He gets to stay inside. He gets the special coat. He gets the special treatment. He's the favored son. And even though he has a pretty good experience with Potiphar overall, serving faithfully, getting the prestige of being the highest ranking servant in Potiphar's house, he's in prison again for something that he didn't do. The story of Joseph is a fascinating look at how God works, and I think teens and adults both can relate to that. Is this normal? Is what I'm going through normal? Genesis 40. But when all goes well with you, remember me and show me kindness, mention me to Pharaoh and get me out of this prison. The chief cupbearer, however, did not remember Joseph. He forgot him. As if Joseph hadn't been kicked enough, betrayed by his own family, unjustly put into prison. Finally works his way up in prison, gets to talk to people, gets to finally share his story about who he was and what happened and how he got there, and says, please remember me. And he has forgotten. Maybe I'm beating a dead horse at this point, but I think you can see there's a lot of common ground for adults and kids. Why do I feel alone? The story of Joseph gives some compelling answers to that question. And then finally, I'm about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph made the Israelites swear an oath. As an old man, Joseph gets to wrestle with this. Whom do I really have in this life? And if we can get our teens to think about that question now, we will all be better served because of it. Okay, so the story of Joseph gives us some context for talking about ministry to teens. I didn't want to just come and give you a Bible study about the story of Joseph. I wanted to provide you some practical, encouragement, but also some practical evidence that says what I'm about to tell you has at least some basis in fact, right? So I asked all my teens, all the ones I work with. I asked, Mr. Schaller is up here in the front. He can confirm this. I asked, tell me what the conference, the men of his word, need to hear about teen ministry. And this is what happened. We took a couple class periods, and all of a sudden it just spilled out. A ton of information. A ton of information about who teens are, what they struggle with, how they deal with it. So what I'm about to share with you is this is not my words. These are the words of the teenagers that I work with. Okay? And I think they gave some incredibly insightful and good things for us to talk about. So, first of all, they recognize that there are significant challenges in this world for them. Significant challenges. And I think we would recognize that too, but it's good for us to acknowledge it and to admit it. The first, maybe, is this one that they pointed out. I kind of like this quote from Victor Hugo. I'm not totally useless. I can be used as a bad example. For better or worse, we have to admit this to our teenagers. We have to admit that we have not always been a good example for them. That's a challenge. There is, I suppose, some flattery in that. Whether you realize it or not, your teenagers are looking up to you. They're going to model their lives after you, and it's humbling to admit that we haven't done the the best job about that. When I was installed as a pastor, finally, when I went to Laramie, Wyoming, installed, and with every pastor's installation, they always read the qualifications for a public minister found in Timothy and Titus. And as you stand up there and you're hearing these words, you must be above reproach. Your head drops a little bit, right? And you keep going through those verses and your head just keeps getting lower and lower, and you're like, oh, what am I doing here? I don't deserve this. And you're right. You're right, you don't. Ministry is a gift. Being a pastor is a gift. It's a grace, like the Apostle Paul says. I think this is worth mentioning to our teens. We've messed this up. I'm not your parent. I'm not your teacher because God somehow selected me out of all of the others as just the one that was best. No. It's a gift. It's a grace, and I don't deserve it. It's a big challenge for teenagers. They have to navigate the bad examples we sometimes set for them. Of course, you know that they're also in the world that you see. And for many of us who are getting older, for many of us who find more gray hairs in their beard every morning than the previous morning, you might think, man, this is just getting to be a weird and scary place. And I won't fault you for that assumption, but I would point out that it's always been a weird and scary place. From the moment Adam and Eve first fell into sin, the world became a weird and scary place. It was a broken place. Maybe it's become just more blatant and obvious for some of our teens now. It's a huge hurdle for them. Just think of some of the things that they're wrestling with and dealing with right now. Consider the lure of consumerism that permeates every part of our culture. Buy. You need this. You got to have this. You got to have this. Consider how that often leads to unabashed greed and selfishness. Consider the confusing implications of AI. One of the things I'm going to mention later on is that teens often crave authenticity. And now you've got AI. A manufactured world? How do we look at this? How do we talk about this? Look at the prevalence of sex in our society. It sells everything. Everything. There are many worldly pleasures that they're facing. They recognize it, and we have to admit it too. And then finally, of course, is their own sinful nature. We can't discount this reality, and it's good for us to talk about that with them. You have a sinful nature that fights against what God says. Just like I have a sinful nature that fights against what God says. You have a sinful nature that wants to go in the opposite direction when God says go this way. Big, huge challenges that teens are facing. And there's probably a whole bunch of other ones that we could talk about and be more specific about. But I'll leave it general because I got to make sure I save time for questions and comments. So I'll buzz through. Okay, here are some recurring themes that came out, and I'm going to get my notes out on here because just yesterday I asked the teens about this and said, all right, are there any other comments that you want me to add here? Okay, here were some recurring themes that came up in their comments. First of all, they are longing for authentic connections with real people. They don't want to be lumped in with their parents. This was humbling for me as a pastor because I realized that there were many times that as a pastor, I simply figured, well, I reached out to mom and dad. They can convey that information to their own teenagers, not realizing that I have to reach out to the teenagers themselves. In many ways, teenagers recognize that they're being asked to be adults, and yet at the same time, we're not treating them like adults in that way, valuing them as individuals and having authentic relationships with them. I wonder, too, just a side note, I wonder, too, if COVID has a big, I still haven't wrapped my head around that. I just wonder what impact COVID had on the teens that were especially going through that at particular ages, but that's a random note. They want to discuss their place and potential in this world, which means we have to get vocation correct. The Lutheran teaching of vocation. You know what the Lutheran teaching of vocation is? It's the idea that God places everyday, ordinary, beautiful responsibilities in front of you, and that it is no greater to be a pastor than it is to be an accountant. We have to get this correct when we talk with our kids. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm unashamed about telling kids how cool ministry is and what a blessing it is to be able to experience some of these incredible gifts in ministry. But we have to make sure that we're telling them, hey, you might have the gifts to be an accountant. You might have the gifts to be a janitor, and that's wonderful. The work that you do as an accountant and a janitor, as a faithful servant of God, is beautiful in God's sight. There's a quote that's sometimes thrown out there. I think it was from Luther, although I think it's sort of dubious. I'm not sure if we can actually pinpoint it, but he said a shoemaker, a cobbler, God doesn't love the shoes he makes because he puts little crosses on them. He loves them because they're good shoes, and God loves good craftsmanship. Let's tell our kids that. Let them see their place in the world. Let them see the gifts God has given them and how they can use them. As we get into some specific encouragements, some specific applications, I'll let you know that I think this means we have to be better about finding places for teens to serve in our churches. We don't just have them be the babysitters for adult Bible class. We don't just have them do the slides. Now, maybe they're the smartest people in the room when it comes to technology. That could be, but I think we might have to find different and more ways for them to serve. This one came up so often in my conversations with the teens. They do not always feel as if they've been allowed to ask questions. I told you I just sat in and Professor, Dr., Pastor, I just got to shorten that, PDP Berg. I just sat in his presentation. He doesn't know this, but he had a big influence on me because when I was a pastor out in Laramie, he came and presented to our pastors' conference while I was considering the call to serve at Luther High School. And I just went up to him, I had never met him, and I was like, I know you teach part-time at Wisco, so tell me what I need to know about how to serve teens, because I'm trying to figure out if this would work for me, if this would be a good call for me. And he said, well, I'm not going to tell you everything, but I'm going to say, here is the one thing that I have found most valuable in my service to teens. He said, on Fridays, I start off with a quiz. They do a quiz every week on Friday. And then the rest of the class time, I have them write out questions, and we put them in a hat, and then I pick one of the questions, and we just talk about it. That has been the best part of my ministry in Luther. For me personally, I also think maybe for the teens. They don't always feel like they've been allowed to ask questions. Big questions. Real questions. Sometimes it feels to them as if when they do ask questions, we assume that they are abandoning their faith or forsaking their faith, when really they're just trying to understand why. When they ask, why is it wrong to live together with my girlfriend before getting married? They aren't saying, this is what I want to do, and I'm going to do it the first chance I get. They're saying, why is that wrong? And how do I understand this? Because I haven't found a Bible passage that says it's wrong to live together with your girlfriend. What are the things that are going on here? And you might be surprised when you study it and when you talk about it, that they're ready to hear the answers. I think that maybe is the other thing, that sometimes they ask questions and we've already presumed that they know the answers, or we presumed what their answers will be. When I was in Farmington, New Mexico, we did a lot of work on the Navajo reservation. And one of the things about reservation ministry that is incredible challenge is that on reservations, so many churches come and go. As the next wave of missionaries come in from another church body, they come in for a couple years, they kind of do some things, they maybe prop up some benefits for the Navajo people or for indigenous people, and then they're gone. Because it takes so much time and so much energy and so much effort. So that was a huge challenge for us, and we kind of went into our ministry on the Navajo Nation saying we got to be in it for the long haul. And that's where I started in ministry, really, as a volunteer with Wells Kingdom Workers. And I remember very early on, my first year there, we had our pastor talk to them about worship. What do they like about worship? Because we would pick them up and bring them to church on a Sunday morning. And what would you think the teens, the Navajo teens, enjoyed most about worship? And I won't tell you what kind of worship we had or what style of worship we had. I'll just say, what do you think they enjoyed most? I'll take thoughts on that. What do you think?
The band.
Yeah, the music, right? The upbeat tempo of the music. Any other ideas? You know what they liked most? Oh, go ahead, Leo. Yeah. What? Food. Yeah, right? Youth group. Food, right? We're going to have a teen Bible study. We're going to go out for lunch, right? You'd think that was big on their list. You know what their number one thing was that they loved? Liturgy. They loved that there was a back and forth on Sunday to a person. Every single one of those teens said, you know what I like? I like that we get to participate. We get to speak back and forth with the pastor. Nothing to do with music. Nothing to do with food. Don't presume we know the answers. Don't presume that we know what teens really want. We should ask them. We should talk to them. All right. They want understanding, but they also want unwavering direction. So I'll use this example again. Why would it be wrong for me to live with my girlfriend before we get married? They'll ask the question. They want to know why. I think this generation of teens, this is my perception, they're a little bit different than my generation. I think I wanted understanding, but in the end, I didn't want direction. I was going to take what my parents said and say, well, that's nice and all, but I'm going to do something different. My perception of this generation is they say, tell me why. They want to know the answers. And when we finally say the answers, they're like, okay, what do you think? They're open to hearing that. And if we say, this is not good, you're not going to find a Bible passage that says, thou shalt not live with your girlfriend. You'll find Bible passages that say, you shall not have sex with your girlfriend. But if we simply say, this is too risky of a behavior, it opens you up to all sorts of temptations and dangers, and we say, just don't do it, they say, oh, okay, I see. To me, it seems as if this group of teenagers, this age group, really is also craving some unwavering direction. And boy, isn't that a wonderful opportunity for us. All right, last one. You need to know this. Teens are busier than ever, and it's not always their fault. They are sometimes forced to do things that they have very little control of. And sometimes they are forced to do things by parents who want them to do things because they didn't get a chance to do things. They don't always have control over this. We can mourn how busy the teenager is, and we can. That's fine, but we have to recognize what might be behind it at times. Maybe it's us. They wanted you to know that, by the way. Okay? So what do we do then in the face of all of this? How am I doing on time? Do you know what time we're supposed to be done? 20 minutes ago. This is like one of my Bible studies, one of my classes, right? All right. Here are a couple words of encouragement. I won't read through this. What I want you to realize is that when I hear people talk about why young people are leaving the wells, and we have studies that look into this. This has been for years now. We've been doing this. Why are young people leaving the wells? Why do our young people go after confirmation? They seem distant from our church. Maybe they'll come back, but maybe they won't. And I don't know that we ever get any answers. And so sometimes it feels to me as if what we say is, well, they're teenagers. What are you going to do? That's just the teenage experience. Elijah, after this great showdown on Mount Carmel, where God displays His glory, shows everyone who the one true God is. You remember what happens after that? King Ahab, Queen Jezebel put a bounty on his life. Elijah runs away. And he goes down to Horeb, maybe Mount Sinai, actually, to hear what God says. And he lays it all out. He says, this isn't working, God. Look, I'm doing what you told me to do. I'm preaching, I'm teaching, but it's hopeless. There's nothing we can do here. This is just the way it is. And God comes to him in a gentle whisper and says, I still have 7,000 people who have not bowed a knee to Baal. My encouragement for you is to remember that you have a powerful God who works. This is not a hopeless situation. Why are young people leaving the wells? At the very least, we have to just admit, we got to do something. So remember that. Whoops, sorry. What else can we do? Luke chapter 18 gives this account of a persistent widow who prays and prays and prays. So pray and pray and pray. In the midst of the challenges they face, in the midst of all the personal struggles they have, pray. What else? I think this is a good word of advice. Before I went back to school to be a pastor, I talked to my mission counselor at the time, and he said, here's what you need to know about ministry. 90% of it is just being there. Just show up. Be there. Be there for the teenagers. Be there. Go to their things. Go to their band concerts. Go to their basketball games. Be there. And then also this. My apologies to the young people for the picture I'm about to put up. Hopefully, the older people remember AT&T and their slogan, right? Reach out and touch someone. This was an idea of, look, you got to be the one who initiate. Yeah, I know, right? You couldn't get away with this theme anymore. You really couldn't. It's terrible, right? My encouragement to you is be the kind of person that's going to reach out to them individually. That's what my grandfather did. It started in high school when I thought it would be fun to go to parties all the time and drink, get drunk. One day, my grandpa called me up. And what my grandpa did, and keep in mind, this is before cell phones. So he didn't just call my cell phone. He called my parents and said, I need to talk to your son. And so they did. They let him. And my grandpa said this to me after I had been kicked off the basketball team, kicked off of the school play, kicked off of forensics, all of it. He said, look, I want you to know something. I want you to know that what you've been doing is wrong. You need to know that. But I also want you to know this. I think sometimes we as adults put way too many and too high expectations on you, and we don't have understanding for that. And he said, I want you to know that I'm sorry for that. And I want to be better too. I think about that all the time. I think we have to be adults who do that. We call them up and we talk to them. And we talk to them as individuals and we confess our failures to them and then we say, I'm in it with you. So let me know what I can do. And then the last one is really something I guess I already talked about, extending forgiveness. Receiving forgiveness. Be the people that model this for teenagers. Be the people that actually say to someone, I'm sorry. I messed that up. Or be the people that when someone confesses sin to you, you actually say, you are forgiven. You are forgiven. Not just, it's fine, don't worry about it. But say, you are forgiven because that's what Jesus says. Okay. With the last couple minutes, Dom, how are we doing on time? What do we got?
You can still operate with the next set, so you have as much as till like 12:40 if you want. But
Okay. Let me just throw it out to you as a group. Maybe what I can do, I do have maybe some more practical suggestions if you want to hear them in the 3 areas here coming up. Family context. So what are some ways as families that we can actually minister and support teenagers? Ministry context, social context. But I also kind of want to hear from you too. So let me start there. Let me just say, are there any thoughts or comments or questions? Go for it, yeah.
I'm really interested in this. It's on topic, but it's kind of off topic.
Okay.
This whole cell phone thing.
Yeah.
So you started with that.
Yeah.
And so I'm wondering what you can learn from that, because this interaction with teenagers now is 3 people are involved in the conversation all the time.
Yeah.
It's their phone. It's you and them.
Yeah.
You cannot talk to them without their phone in their hand or in their jeans or wherever, and it's super annoying. So I'm trying to figure out, obviously these tactics work if you actually have their attention. Well, not tactics, but
Yep.
if you're going to communicate with them, ask them about their identity, ask the hard questions, ask them what they want. How do you remove, or what experience have you had so far at Luther that they can actually communicate with each other?
Great question. Yeah. So a little bit of context to that. 2 years ago, we were thinking about a cell phone policy, and we just kind of said, I don't think we've wrapped our heads around it. So we waited until this last summer, and we put a policy in place that said, you will not have cell phones out in any classroom space. So that means that when you walk into a classroom, your phone is not in your pocket. It is in your backpack. And there's a specific reason why it's not in your pocket, because research shows, you should read a book called The Anxious Generation if you haven't read that. It's an incredible book. But you should really read that. Jonathan Haidt, I think his name is, Haidt. Research shows that if your phone is in your pocket, you are distracted. Because it buzzes, there's notifications. It's just when it's in your pocket, you're distracted. As my son goes and puts his phone away quickly right now. So we said, have it put away in classroom spaces. We allow them to have their phones in between classes. If you wanted to know my honest opinion, I'd like to see that go away too. I would love to see that go away. But I will say this, and maybe one of my students could chime in if he wants to. I feel as if this year we have had better conversations because of that. Would you agree?
Yeah, probably.
Begrudging agreement. Yeah. That is one of my practical suggestions for you within the social context as well as the family context. Get rid of as many screens as possible. They're not evil. They're not. But they impact us way more than we realize. They really do. And the impact is on both adults and teens, but especially younger people whose brains are still forming and developing. I mean, the teenage boy's brain doesn't develop until well after he's a teenager. 25, 26, 27, somewhere in there. So get rid of the screens as much as possible. If you do have phones in your home, my encouragement, and this is what we've done with our kids, we just say, here's the unwavering direction we give, and they're open to it. We simply say, if you have a phone, you have to know that it is fair game for us to pick it up at any time and look at it. Not because we're trying to catch you in some sort of diabolical behavior, but because we're all trying to work together and hold each other accountable. I think it's worked well. We have some weird idiosyncrasies at Luther that we haven't figured out yet, because sometimes the world of education requires them to have screens, and that's often beyond our control. We offer some classes through other colleges, and they don't have the same policies, so that's made it difficult for us. But that's a great question. Yes.
When you're talking about with the phones, I have 2 sons that are 32, 34, and when they were in high school, they started, at that time it was all flip phones yet. We didn't have the smartphones that we have now. But, they would do group chats, and there could be 5 or 6 people sitting in a room, and they were busy texting each other. They've lost the art of communication. And now, my 2 sons, even my daughter, who's 48, they'll send me the messages on my phone. I still got the flip phone, not quite as ancient as having the phone that you had on the wall.
Yeah.
I worked for the phone company for 43 years,
All right.
11 years ago. I remember when we had the rotary phones.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
Not quite the crank phones, they were, but.
The party line and everything. I remember that party line. Yeah.
But, and that is part of the problem that you see so many kids that are walking around and they're on their phone, but they don't know how to talk with anybody. The art of actually physically talking to somebody has declined. You'll ask a question of some of the younger people, and they'll kind of look at you and go, huh?
Yeah.
They don't know how to respond.
I would agree that, and there's some actually good research out there. In fact, I think that book actually mentions some of it, that perhaps we should look into this more. The polarization of our world, politically, maybe even culturally, can be somewhat contributed to a lack of ability to have regular dialogic conversations back and forth. I don't want to overestimate it, but I also don't want to underestimate it either. Yeah. Okay, we got a ton. So, go ahead. Back.
My oldest is 13. We've been kind of dabbling with the phone experience. And I found that, I guess, we communicate a lot in person, but I find that the things that he maybe has an awkward time communicating in person, he'll run to his room and then he starts the text conversation. What do you think about that? Should that be forced into a personal conversation, or is it okay to keep that distance?
Yeah, that's a great question, probably especially for parents. And maybe I shouldn't put Leo on the spot, but I think we've kind of wondered that too at times, where do you sort of force them to break out of maybe the way their natural inclination is, or maybe even their personality is, where they don't do well with face-to-face conversation, or do you allow them to communicate in a way that lets them effectively express what they're thinking? I don't know.
Lose that communication.
Yeah. So I guess my thought is this. I catch myself doing this, and this is maybe where I've been a bad example at times. I probably, as a pastor, talk too much about the big, scary world out there. And it is. It's big and scary. But then I bring it into the home. And really, I feel like I should do a better job of saying, out there might be a big and scary place, but here, this is a safe place. I know that's kind of a trigger word in our society. Like, I'm not using it that way, but I want you to know that we can have honest conversations about sin and difficulty in our family. And in fact, we're going to put the phones away and we're going to sit around the dinner table and we're going to talk. And this is part of what we do as a family. And I'm not trying to force you to overshare or force you to have it all figured out. I just want you to know that we are here to support you and build you up, and this is a good place to do that. I feel like that's probably a non-answer to your question, and I'm sorry. But keep wrestling with it. Yep.
So I was a middle school special ed teacher in the public school system for 15 years. And the school didn't have a policy against cell phones, but I made my own policy in their room.
Okay.
So I had chargers for them because most of the teenagers would come to school with their phone at 9%, 8%. And then they loved just putting it on the charger. And then their conversations would just, once they're engaged in an activity that was fun, it would just take care of itself.
Yeah.
And they would forget that their phone was even there. They would come back and be like, "Oh, Mr. Kelly, I forgot my phone."
Yeah.
And it would still be on the charger.
Yeah. If I was a conspiracy theorist, I would say, I might be, by the way. Yeah.
Are you talking about yourself?
Right? Yeah. Have you ever heard that? Like a lot of phone companies will say this, like it's not good for you to have your phone plugged in all the time. I think that's a conspiracy because they want you to be using it and they want you to be on it. So, all right. I apologize for neglecting this side of the room. 2 minutes. All right. Go with it. Yep.
So I work in the medical field, and going back to some of your slides, you talk about the phone and the communication that our teenagers do or don't have. And I think many of your points could go directly back to the pandemic, being working, in the epicenter of it, and then seeing the ripple effects from it. So we as adults say they don't know how to communicate with anybody. They can't go into a restaurant and look somebody in the eye and order a meal. Well, in those very, very informative, those critical years, they weren't allowed to.
Yeah.
And if they did, they had to wear a mask, which covers up so much stuff of how we communicate through our mouth. Just the raising of a lip.
Yeah.
They didn't get that.
Yeah.
So maybe a little grace and a little more patience with this teenage group and not being able to communicate. They weren't allowed to.
Yeah.
We've scared the snot out of them, because if you look at somebody, you're going to die from the flu.
Yep.
So I think
Yeah.
there's so much that these kids want. It was the absolute opposite of what they had during those critical 2-3 years of the pandemic.
Great reminder. Thank you for bringing that up. One of the things the teenagers kind of put it this way. They said, we are asked to be adults, and yet we haven't been given necessarily the resources to be adults. So maybe that applies to our encouragement to them. If we want them to converse, we have to teach them too, especially this group that came up through that generation, through that time period, a huge pivotal moment.
We want them to be adults in class or in school or whatever, but they have to raise their hand to go pee.
Yes.
When are they going
Yep.
to adult?
Yep.
Decide what you're going to do for the rest of your
Yeah.
life, because it's you're a senior, but I got to raise my hand to go pee. It's kind of a weird thing.
Yeah, have some grace with them. That's a good reminder. Yep.
I just have a comment for our young men in this room and at the entire conference. One of the things that I just get discouraged about is when we go to church meetings and other district meetings and things like that. There's no young people there. So first of all, I'd like to thank the young men here for being here today. Your presence brings a lot of value to us. And secondly, I just want these young guys to know that your congregations need you. Because you have certain gifts, you have certain talents, and you can bring a lot to your own congregations. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being here.
All right, I've neglected a hand in the back, and I'm sorry. I want to end with that one. I'm going to stick around, so if you'd like to talk more, I'd be happy to do that. But let's finish it up with the last comment. Yeah.
Question with teen involvement. So you are at a Lutheran high school where they're in God's Word every day. My senior year at the seminary, I was asked by my congregation to try and get a youth group going. There were 2 Wells high schools and 3 public schools that were all represented in that congregation, and I just tried to do an after-school Bible study at the closest high school. 3 different times I'd show up at the Wells English teacher's classroom that she had set aside. She'd remind them in the hallways, don't forget this afternoon. No one ever came.
Yeah.
How do you, out in a public school setting, all of my youth at my congregation are public schoolers except for 2 that go to prep. How do you get them to come and find time with the busyness that I have seen in their lives?
Yeah, that's a real good question, and I wish I had a real good answer. What I will say is what we have struggled with at Luther, a Lutheran high school, is you have kids who say, you know what, we're in chapel 5 days a week. We're in God's Word every single day in classrooms. Why do I need to go on Sunday? My only encouragement is to say, present this as a joyful thing, and to simply say, we're not saying you have to come. We want you to want to come. Right? I don't think we've got a long ways to go. Our school has a long ways to go. But one thing that has been effective is modeling it. If you can get one, that often starts the snowball. I was blessed to have a really good group of leaders last year in the senior class, and we had one that was just there. And boy, did that take off then. So, I'm sorry. It's a great question.
Pastor, I may have something to add
Sure.
to that. So
Yeah.
I work at a public school, and they've started this thing, and it's mostly all student-led. It's they call it FCA. It's a Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And it's just like what you said. It took a couple of the kids to be just on fire for it, because a lot of them that aren't coming to it may be embarrassed. They may think that it's like, oh, I don't want to be that kid. I don't want to. You just take those couple to remove the stigma from it, and all of a sudden, and it's exploded. I mean, there is dozens of kids in it now. So it's just get those recruits,
And maybe that's the other thing too. When the one shows up, and when one just comes to your Bible study, we have a Sunday or a Wednesday morning Bible study before school at Luther, and we don't get a huge number, but we get excited about the 2 that come or the 3 that come. Be excited about that, because you have opportunities for authentic, genuine, one-on-one conversations with them, which they value. And if you say, "Man, I wish we had more people here," don't do that, right? All right. Thank you all. I really appreciate it.